The girl they tried hardest to hide was the one destiny had already chosen. The wheels of the carriage rattled over the frozen road, each bump sending a soft tremor through Evelyn Hart's slender frame. She sat alone on the narrow bench at the back, surrounded by trunks, garment bags, and decorative boxes that belonged to her sisters. A small lantern swung from a hook above her head, scattering golden light across the cramped compartment. Outside, winter forest stretched endlessly beneath a silver moon. Inside, silence wrapped around her like a second skin. Evelyn pulled her worn gray cloak tighter around her shoulders. Even after 21 years, she still wasn't used to the cold way her family treated her. Or perhaps she was. That was the saddest part. The laughter from the front compartment drifted through the wooden partition. Victoria and Scarlett were celebrating again. They had spent nearly the entire trip discussing gowns, jewels, and the possibility of becoming the Alpha King's future Luna. Every few minutes, another burst of excited laughter echoed through the carriage. None of it included Evelyn. The door suddenly opened. Warm air flooded inside. Scarlett leaned through the doorway, her blonde curls perfectly arranged despite the long journey. "There you are," she said sharply. "I was wondering why it had gotten so quiet." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "Did you need something?" Scarlett handed her a folded silk dress. "Fix this wrinkle." Evelyn carefully accepted the expensive fabric. "Of course." Scarlett hesitated, studying her for a moment. "And remember what Father said." Evelyn nodded automatically. "Stay out of sight." "Good." Scarlett smiled. "The last thing we need is you embarrassing us at the palace." The door shut again. The warmth disappeared. Evelyn stared at the dress in her hands. Her fingers moved automatically, smoothing the delicate material. She had become very good at helping others shine. It was easier than wondering why she was never allowed to shine herself. Beyond the carriage window, moonlight spilled across the snow-covered landscape. The Northern Territories were preparing for the Moon Crown Gathering, the largest royal celebration in decades. Noble families from every pack had been invited. Hundreds of young women would attend. Somewhere ahead waited Blackthorn Palace, home of Alpha King Damian Blackwood. Even saying his name seemed to change the air around people. Powerful, untouchable, legendary. Evelyn had heard the stories all her life. The king who united rival territories. The ruler whose presence silenced entire rooms. The alpha who had rejected every attempt to find him a mate. Yet tonight, for the first time in years, he would host a gathering open to all eligible wolves. Every noble family viewed it as an opportunity. Every ambitious daughter dreamed of becoming Luna. Every mother whispered prayers to the moon goddess. Everyone except Evelyn. She wasn't attending as a guest. She was attending as a servant. The carriage slowed. Voices called outside. Horses snorted in the cold air. Evelyn shifted toward the window and caught her first glimpse of the palace. Her breath caught. Blackthorn Palace rose above the snowy cliffs like something from an old legend. Thousands of lights glowed behind towering windows. Golden banners fluttered from stone towers. Music drifted faintly through the night. The entire mountain seemed alive with light. For a moment, wonder replaced the familiar ache inside her chest. Then another voice shattered it. "Keep her hidden." The words came from outside the carriage. Her father. Evelyn froze. "Do you understand?" He continued quietly. "Victoria and Scarlett are our future. No one important needs to notice Evelyn." A second voice answered. "Of course, sir." Footsteps moved away. Evelyn stared at the window, unable to move. She should have felt surprised. Instead, she felt tired. Very tired. As if disappointment had become a permanent part of her heartbeat. The carriage rolled through the palace gates. Torches lined the entrance. Noble guests filled the courtyard. Servants rushed in every direction carrying luggage and flowers. Excitement crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Evelyn reached for one of the heavy trunks. It nearly slipped from her hands before she steadied it. The moment she stepped down from the carriage, cold wind swept across the courtyard. Snowflakes danced through the golden light. Around her, beautiful women descended from elegant carriages. Silk gowns shimmered. Precious stones sparkled. Confident smiles filled every face. Evelyn lowered her head and followed the servants toward the side entrance. No one looked at her. No one noticed her. At least, that was what everyone believed. Far above, in the highest tower of Blackthorn Palace, Alpha King Damian Blackwood stood beside a frost-covered window. His silver eyes narrowed slightly. For the first time in 10 years, an unfamiliar feeling stirred deep within him. Something distant, something impossible, something calling. And somewhere below, hidden among servants and shadows, the girl nobody wanted seen crossed the palace threshold for the very first time. The palace seemed even larger from the inside. Evelyn followed a line of servants through endless stone corridors illuminated by crystal chandeliers and warm golden lanterns. Every polished surface reflected light. Every archway revealed another breathtaking hallway. Yet she barely noticed any of it. Her attention remained fixed on the heavy trunk balanced carefully in her arms. One mistake was all it would take. One stumble, one dropped box, one moment of drawing attention to herself. That was what she feared most. A steward wearing royal colors directed arriving servants with brisk efficiency. Guest wing to the east. Noble family luggage to the second floor. Kitchen staff report immediately. Voices echoed from every direction. Footsteps hurried across marble floors. Somewhere distant, musicians were rehearsing for the evening celebration. The entire palace felt alive. Evelyn finally reached the guest quarters assigned to the Hart family. Victoria and Scarlett had already claimed the finest rooms. Their gowns hung beside enormous windows overlooking the snowy mountains. Jewelry boxes covered the dressing tables. Fresh roses filled silver vases. Everything smelled expensive. Everything looked perfect. "About time," Victoria said when she noticed Evelyn entering. "Put the blue trunk near the wardrobe." Evelyn obeyed quietly. Scarlett examined herself in a tall mirror. "The banquet begins tomorrow evening. Representatives from every major pack will attend." She smiled at her reflection. "Imagine becoming Luna before summer." Victoria laughed. "Please, if anyone becomes Luna, it will be me." Their familiar competition filled the room. Evelyn continued unpacking without speaking. She had listened to these conversations her entire life. Sometimes she wondered if either sister had ever asked what she wanted. Not that it mattered. No one expected anything from Evelyn Hart except silence and obedience. Once the luggage was organized, another knock sounded at the door. A palace attendant appeared. "The Hart family has been invited to tomorrow's royal presentation ceremony." Victoria straightened immediately. Scarlett nearly squealed with excitement. The attendant continued. "Additional servants may report to the lower service halls at sunrise." His eyes briefly landed on Evelyn. "You as well." The door closed. Victoria turned toward her younger sister. "Perfect." Evelyn already knew she would not like that tone. "Perfect?" she asked softly. Victoria crossed her arms. "You will work with the palace staff tomorrow." Scarlett nodded enthusiastically. "It keeps you busy and out of sight." Evelyn lowered her gaze. "I understand." The answer seemed to satisfy them. A few minutes later, they dismissed her entirely. Evelyn left the luxurious guest suite and followed signs toward the servant quarters. The difference was impossible to ignore. The guest wing glittered with elegance. The lower levels were simpler, functional, quiet. Rows of modest rooms lined narrow hallways. Workers prepared decorations, polished silverware, and organized supplies for the gathering. No one paid attention to Evelyn. Strangely, she preferred it that way. Later that night, after finishing several small tasks assigned by the palace staff, she finally stepped outside onto a secluded balcony overlooking the northern cliffs. Snow drifted gently through the darkness. The stars seemed impossibly bright above the mountains. For the first time since arriving, she felt able to breathe. Cold air filled her lungs. Silence surrounded her. "Beautiful, is it not?" a voice asked nearby. Evelyn startled and turned. An elderly woman stood near the balcony entrance wrapped in deep blue robes embroidered with silver thread. Her white hair glowed beneath the moonlight. "I am sorry," Evelyn said quickly. "I did not realize anyone else was here." The woman smiled. "Most people do not notice me either." Something about the answer made Evelyn pause. "The palace can be overwhelming," the woman continued, "especially for someone who spends her life standing in the background." Evelyn blinked. "How did you know that?" The woman's smile deepened, but she did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the distant towers rising above the palace. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the stars hide their brightest light behind the darkest clouds." Before Evelyn could respond, a distant bell rang across the palace grounds. The woman turned to leave. "Sleep well, child. Tomorrow will change more lives than you can imagine." Evelyn watched her disappear into the corridor. A strange feeling settled inside her chest. Not fear, not sadness, something else, something she could not explain. Far above, in the royal tower, Damian Blackwood stood awake long after midnight. His silver eyes stared across the sleeping palace. That unfamiliar feeling had returned again. Stronger now. Closer. And for the first time in many years, the Alpha King found himself unable to ignore it. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of silver frost. Evelyn barely slept after her encounter with the mysterious woman on the balcony. Her words lingered in Evelyn's thoughts as she dressed in a simple servant uniform and joined the growing stream of palace staff moving through the lower corridors. The entire palace seemed transformed overnight. Fresh flowers decorated every archway. Crystal lanterns sparkled above polished marble floors. Noble guests filled the halls with excited conversation. Everywhere she looked, preparations for the royal presentation ceremony were underway. Evelyn carried folded linens toward the grand ballroom, careful to stay out of everyone's path. Servants hurried past with trays of pastries, polished silver, and towering arrangements of winter roses. The scent of pine and fresh bread drifted through the air. Despite the beauty surrounding her, she felt invisible as always. And yet, somewhere deep inside, she could not shake the strange feeling that something important was approaching. High above the palace, Damian Blackwood stood in a private council chamber overlooking the eastern mountains. Several advisors discussed ceremonial details around a long oak table, but the Alpha King heard very little of it. His attention remained fixed on the unfamiliar sensation that had followed him since the previous evening. It was faint, elusive, like a distant melody carried on the wind. Every few hours it seemed to strengthen, then disappear again. Damian rarely questioned his instincts. They had guided him through years of leadership and responsibility. Yet this feeling was unlike anything he had ever experienced. One advisor cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, representatives from all major territories have arrived." Damian nodded absent-mindedly. Another continued. "Many expect you to announce future plans regarding the royal bloodline." That finally earned his attention. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the meaning behind those carefully chosen words. The kingdom wanted a Luna. Noble families had spent years hoping their daughters might earn the king's notice. Damian's expression remained unreadable. "The kingdom will receive what it needs when the time is right," he said calmly. No one dared argue. Meanwhile, Evelyn entered the grand ballroom for the first time. Her breath caught instantly. The room seemed endless. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling painted with moonlit skies. Silver banners flowed between marble columns. Hundreds of tables surrounded an enormous dance floor that reflected the morning light like glass. Workers moved everywhere, making final adjustments before the evening festivities. For a moment, Evelyn simply stood there absorbing the beauty. Then a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Evelyn." She turned immediately. Victoria approached wearing an elegant emerald dress fitted perfectly for the ceremony. Scarlet followed beside her in shimmering blue silk. Both looked as though they belonged in a royal portrait. "There you are," Scarlet said. "We have been looking everywhere." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "Is something wrong?" Victoria smiled, though there was little warmth behind it. "Nothing is wrong. We simply wanted to remind you to remain in the service areas tonight." Scarlet leaned closer. "The ballroom will be full of nobles. Important people. Do not wander where you do not belong." Evelyn nodded quietly. "I understand." They seemed satisfied and disappeared back into the crowd. Yet as Evelyn watched them leave, a strange sadness settled over her heart. Not because of their words. She was used to those. It was because for the first time she wondered if perhaps they were afraid of something. Afraid of someone seeing her. Afraid of something changing. The thought felt impossible. By afternoon, guests began gathering throughout the palace. Laughter echoed through every hallway. Anticipation filled the air. Evelyn worked continuously, carrying supplies and assisting wherever needed. Hours passed quickly. Then it happened again. That strange feeling. Somewhere far away, Damian suddenly stopped walking in the middle of a corridor. His pulse quickened unexpectedly. The sensation was stronger than ever before. Closer. Much closer. He turned toward the crowded ballroom below. At almost the exact same moment, Evelyn paused beside a staircase, one hand pressed lightly against her chest. Neither of them understood why. Neither of them knew the other existed. Yet destiny had already begun pulling their paths together, and by nightfall, the distance between them would become impossible to ignore. As evening settled over Blackthorn Palace, the entire kingdom seemed to gather beneath one roof. Music drifted through the grand corridors. Crystal chandeliers illuminated every corner of the enormous ballroom. Noble families arrived in elegant gowns and formal suits, their voices blending into a steady hum of excitement. Everywhere Evelyn looked, people seemed to belong. They laughed easily. They moved confidently. They carried themselves as if they were meant to stand beneath the palace lights. Evelyn felt like a shadow passing quietly between them. She balanced a silver tray carefully in her hands as she followed other servants through the ballroom. Her simple uniform blended perfectly with the dozens of staff members working around the room. Exactly as her family preferred. Exactly as she had always been expected to do. Across the ballroom, Victoria and Scarlet immediately became the center of attention. Both sisters wore elaborate gowns adorned with sparkling gemstones that reflected the chandelier light. Groups of young nobles gathered around them. Compliments flowed freely. Scarlet laughed brightly, while Victoria gracefully accepted every ounce of admiration directed her way. Neither sister looked toward Evelyn. Neither seemed interested in whether she was tired, hungry, or overwhelmed. They only cared that she remained invisible. Meanwhile, Damian Blackwood entered through the royal gallery above the ballroom. The effect was immediate. Conversations softened. Music seemed quieter. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward the Alpha King. Dressed in a formal black suit trimmed with silver embroidery, Damian carried the calm authority that had made him respected throughout the Northern Territories. He acknowledged greetings with polite nods, but offered little else. His silver eyes scanned the crowd. Once again, that strange sensation stirred within him. Stronger now, closer than ever. He paused near the balcony railing overlooking the ballroom floor. Something was here, somewhere among the hundreds of guests. He could feel it. Yet every woman introduced to him felt wrong. Every conversation left the mysterious pull unresolved. Below, Evelyn continued moving between tables, carefully delivering drinks and refreshments. She focused entirely on her work. The last thing she wanted was attention. Unfortunately, attention found her anyway. Evelyn. Her stomach tightened immediately. Victoria approached with Scarlet close behind. Several noble guests accompanied them. All of them looked amused. "We need more sparkling cider at our table," Victoria said. "Right away." Evelyn nodded. "Of course." She hurried toward the refreshment station. Moments later, she returned carrying a large silver pitcher. As she approached the table, one of the noble women smiled at Scarlet. "I still cannot believe your family brought a servant from home." Scarlet laughed softly. "She has always been useful." Evelyn pretended not to hear. She carefully began filling glasses. Then everything happened at once. Victoria shifted her chair backward unexpectedly. The edge brushed against Evelyn's arm. The pitcher tilted. A small splash of cider landed across the tablecloth. Silence followed. Not complete silence, but enough. Enough for nearby guests to notice. Enough for conversations around the table to pause. Evelyn froze. Her heart immediately sank. "Oh dear," Scarlet said dramatically. "How careless." Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Victoria stood slowly. "Do you realize how important this evening is?" Her voice remained calm, but the disappointment behind it felt worse. Evelyn lowered her eyes. "I am sorry. You always say that," Victoria replied. "Why can you never do anything correctly?" The words were not loud, yet they carried farther than Evelyn wished. Heat flooded her face. She could feel people watching, whispering, judging. Every instinct urged her to disappear, to become invisible again. Across the ballroom, Damian suddenly straightened. The strange sensation exploded through his chest with startling force. His pulse accelerated. His attention snapped toward a single location near the center of the room, toward a servant standing beside a table, toward a young woman lowering her eyes, while everyone around her seemed to look away. For the first time all evening, the feeling was unmistakable. And before Damian Blackwood could stop himself, he took a step toward the ballroom floor. Evelyn wished the floor would open beneath her feet. The attention she had spent her entire life avoiding now seemed fixed on her from every direction. Conversations around the nearby tables had quieted. Curious eyes lingered. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others appeared entertained. Victoria slowly lifted the damp edge of the tablecloth as though the accident were far worse than it truly was. "This is exactly why I told you to be careful," she said. Scarlett sighed dramatically. "Honestly, Evelyn, tonight of all nights." Evelyn swallowed hard. "I said I was sorry." Her voice came out softer than she intended. Victoria shook her head. "Sorry does not undo mistakes." The words struck deeper than they should have. Not because they were new. Evelyn had heard versions of them for years. But standing in the center of the kingdom's most important gathering somehow made them heavier. Around her, noble guests began whispering again. She lowered her eyes toward the polished floor. If she remained still long enough, perhaps everyone would lose interest. Perhaps the moment would pass. Then a strange warmth spread through her chest. She blinked in confusion. The sensation felt unfamiliar. Gentle, powerful, almost alive. At the same moment, Damien descended the grand staircase overlooking the ballroom. Every conversation stopped. Hundreds of heads turned instinctively toward him. Yet for once, Damien noticed none of it. His attention remained locked on a single figure near the center of the room. The servant, the young woman standing quietly beside the table. The moment he had seen her, the mysterious pull that had haunted him for days surged with undeniable force. It was no longer a distant feeling. It was certainty. His pulse thundered. His instincts sharpened. Every step toward the ballroom floor seemed guided by something older than reason. Across the room, Evelyn suddenly felt it too. Her breathing caught. The strange warmth expanded. Not painful, not frightening, simply impossible to ignore. She slowly lifted her head. For the first time, her gaze met Damien Blackwood's. The world seemed to stop. The music faded into silence. The ballroom disappeared. Evelyn could not explain why she could not look away. Silver eyes met blue-gray eyes across the crowded room. Something ancient stirred between them. Something neither had chosen. Something neither could deny. A faint gasp echoed somewhere nearby. Then another. Several older wolves exchanged startled looks. They recognized the signs before anyone else. The air itself felt different. Charged. Alive. Damien stopped several feet away from the table. He stared at Evelyn as if seeing something extraordinary. Not because of her gown. She wore none. Not because of status. She had none. Yet every instinct inside him insisted she was the one he had been searching for without realizing it. Evelyn's heart raced so quickly she could barely think. Why was the Alpha King looking at her? Why did she feel as though an invisible thread connected them? Scarlett stepped forward immediately. "Your Majesty." Her voice brightened with sudden excitement. "It is an honor." Victoria quickly followed. "We are delighted to finally meet you." Damien did not even glance in their direction. His eyes never left Evelyn. The sisters' smiles faltered. Around the ballroom, whispers spread like wind through leaves. Guests leaned closer. Advisors exchanged uncertain looks. Nobody understood what they were witnessing, but everyone sensed its importance. Evelyn felt her hands trembling. Instinct told her to step back, to retreat, to disappear. Yet her feet refused to move. Damien finally spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried effortlessly through the stunned silence surrounding them. "What is your name?" For a moment, Evelyn forgot how to breathe. No king had ever spoken directly to her. No noble had ever truly seen her. Yet now the most powerful alpha in the kingdom stood before her waiting for an answer. "Evelyn," she whispered. Damien repeated the name quietly, almost as if testing something precious. "Evelyn." The strange warmth between them intensified. Across the ballroom, several elderly wolves suddenly rose from their seats. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock, because what they sensed was impossible. The legendary mate bond spoken of only in ancient stories had just awakened before the eyes of the entire kingdom. The silence that followed felt almost sacred. Hundreds of people filled the ballroom, yet no one seemed willing to speak. Evelyn stood frozen beneath the chandeliers, her heart racing so quickly she could hear it in her ears. The strange warmth connecting her to Damien continued to grow stronger with every passing second. It was not something she understood. It was not something she could explain. Yet it felt undeniably real. Around them, whispers began spreading through the crowd. Some guests looked astonished. Others appeared confused. A few of the oldest wolves in attendance exchanged knowing glances filled with disbelief. Ancient stories suddenly felt much less ancient. Damien remained exactly where he was. His silver eyes never left Evelyn's face. For years he had attended ceremonies, negotiations, royal gatherings, and celebrations without ever feeling anything remotely similar to this moment. Every noble family had tried to place potential mates before him. Every advisor had offered suggestions. Every kingdom ally had encouraged him to choose a Luna. None of it had mattered. None of it had felt right. Until now. Evelyn lowered her gaze for only a moment, overwhelmed by the attention surrounding her. The instant she did, she felt an unexpected disappointment inside herself, as though some invisible part of her wanted to keep looking at him. The realization startled her. She quickly lifted her eyes again. Damien's expression softened slightly. It was a subtle change, but those who knew the Alpha King noticed immediately. His closest advisors had spent years watching him maintain perfect control over every situation. Yet now something had changed. Victoria noticed it too. Panic flickered behind her carefully practiced smile. She stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Your Majesty," she said brightly, "our family is honored beyond words." Damien finally glanced in her direction. The connection immediately weakened. Not disappeared. Simply faded. The difference was unmistakable. Victoria felt it. Scarlet felt it. Several nearby wolves felt it as well. The attention returned to Evelyn the moment Damien looked back toward her. Scarlet hurried forward. "Evelyn is shy," she explained quickly. "She has always struggled in social situations." Evelyn blinked in surprise. Scarlet had never defended her before. Then she realized this was not a defense. It was an attempt to control the situation, to redirect it, to place distance between her and the king. Damien seemed to recognize it as well. "Has she?" he asked calmly. Scarlet hesitated. "Yes, Your Majesty." Damien's gaze returned to Evelyn. "You do not seem shy right now." The comment caught Evelyn completely off guard. Several guests quietly laughed. Not at her, with gentle amusement. For perhaps the first time all evening, she felt something unexpected. A tiny spark of confidence. "I think I am too surprised to be shy," she admitted softly. A few smiles appeared throughout the ballroom. Damien's expression warmed further. The invisible connection pulsed again. Stronger. Brighter. Across the room, an elderly council member slowly approached. Lord Nathaniel Grey had served 3 generations of rulers and was considered one of the kingdom's greatest scholars. His eyes moved carefully between Damien and Evelyn. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "may I speak freely?" Damien nodded. Nathaniel took a slow breath. "I believe the ancient bond has awakened." The ballroom erupted into murmurs. Some guests gasped openly. Others immediately began discussing old legends and forgotten histories. Evelyn barely heard any of it. Her attention remained fixed on the king standing before her. Ancient bond. The words sounded impossible. They belonged in stories told beside fireplaces. Not in real life. Not here. Not to someone like her. Damien considered Nathaniel's words carefully. Then he did something nobody expected. He offered Evelyn his hand. Not as a command. Not as a royal order. Simply as an invitation. The entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Evelyn stared at the offered hand. Strong. Steady. Patient. Every instinct told her that accepting would change everything. Every fear told her to refuse. Yet deep inside, beneath years of doubt and loneliness, another feeling spoke louder. Trust. Slowly, almost trembling, Evelyn reached forward. The moment their hands touched, a brilliant warmth flowed through both of them. Not visible, not magical in appearance, but powerful enough that every wolf in the ballroom felt it. The ancient stories were no longer stories. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn Hart was no longer invisible. The moment their hands touched, the atmosphere inside the ballroom changed completely. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. Yet everyone felt it. The warmth that had passed between Damien and Evelyn lingered in the air like the final note of a song. Guests exchanged astonished looks. Advisors whispered urgently among themselves. Noble families who had spent years hoping for the king's attention suddenly found themselves watching a servant girl standing at the center of the kingdom's most important moment. Evelyn slowly withdrew her hand, her pulse still racing. She could hardly believe any of this was happening. Only an hour earlier she had been carrying trays and avoiding attention. Now hundreds of eyes were fixed on her. Across the room, Victoria felt panic rising beneath her carefully controlled expression. This was not how the evening was supposed to unfold. She had imagined dancing with powerful nobles. She had imagined conversations with the king. She had imagined becoming the woman everyone admired. Instead, Evelyn stood beside Damien while the entire ballroom watched. Scarlett was thinking the same thing. There must be some mistake, she said suddenly. Her voice was louder than she intended. Several nearby guests turned toward her. Scarlett forced a nervous laugh. I mean, everyone knows stories can be misunderstood. Surely one moment does not prove anything. Victoria immediately stepped forward. My sister is right. Evelyn has always been quiet and reserved. Perhaps emotions are simply running high tonight. Damien's expression remained calm. Do you believe that is what happened? The question instantly drained the confidence from both sisters. Neither answered immediately. Around them, the crowd continued watching closely. Victoria searched for something convincing to say. Your Majesty, our family has attended many royal gatherings. We respect tradition. We simply wish to avoid assumptions. Damien studied her for a moment. Then he looked toward Evelyn. The difference was unmistakable. Whenever his attention shifted toward Evelyn, that quiet connection seemed to strengthen. Whenever it shifted elsewhere, it faded. Lord Nathaniel Grey observed the exchange carefully. Ancient bonds cannot be forced, he said, nor can they be transferred. Several older wolves nodded in agreement. The scholar continued. For centuries, legends described a natural recognition between two souls, not chosen by families, not chosen by status, chosen by destiny. Those words rippled through the ballroom. Destiny. The very thing Victoria and Scarlett could not control. Evelyn stood silently through it all. Part of her still expected someone to explain that this was a misunderstanding, that she had imagined everything. Yet every time she glanced toward Damien, the strange certainty returned. The feeling of being seen, truly seen, not as a servant, not as a burden, not as someone standing in another person's shadow. Damien finally stepped closer. The movement immediately silenced the remaining whispers. Evelyn, hearing her name spoken in his calm voice, still felt unreal. Yes, Your Majesty? His eyes softened slightly. You may call me Damien. A collective gasp moved through the crowd. Royal protocol was not easily set aside. Yet Damien spoke as though the decision were perfectly natural. Evelyn blinked in surprise. I do not think I could. A few people smiled. Even Damien appeared amused. Then perhaps someday. The simple exchange carried more warmth than any grand speech could have. Across the ballroom, Victoria and Scarlett exchanged troubled looks. For the first time in their lives, they could not push Evelyn into the background. They could not interrupt. They could not redirect attention elsewhere. Something larger than social status had entered the room. Something neither of them could compete with. High above the ballroom, beyond the crystal chandeliers and silver banners, the moon shone through the palace windows. Its pale light spilled across the marble floor where Damien and Evelyn stood facing one another. And as the kingdom watched in stunned silence, more and more people began to realize the same truth. The forgotten daughter of the Hart family was becoming the most important woman in the room. The ballroom remained suspended between disbelief and wonder. No one seemed eager to leave. No one wanted to risk missing what might happen next. Evelyn could feel hundreds of eyes upon her. Yet for the first time in her life, the attention did not feel cruel. It felt uncertain, curious, as though the kingdom itself was trying to understand how an overlooked Omega had suddenly become the center of an ancient story. Damien remained beside her, calm and composed despite the storm of whispers surrounding them. His presence carried a quiet reassurance that steadied her racing thoughts. For years he had been viewed as untouchable, a ruler defined by strength and duty. Yet standing beside Evelyn, there was something different in his expression, something warmer, something human. Lord Nathaniel Grey stepped forward once more. The elderly scholar looked toward the royal council gathered near the ballroom entrance. There is something the kingdom deserves to hear, he announced. His voice carried easily across the room. Silence followed immediately. Nathaniel turned toward Evelyn. Many years ago, before the current generation was born, an old prophecy was recorded within the royal archives. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Even Damien appeared surprised. Nathaniel continued. It spoke of a future Luna who would not rise through power, wealth, or influence. She would arrive unseen, forgotten by those closest to her. Yet when the time came, the moon would reveal her worth before the entire kingdom. Evelyn felt her breath catch. The words sounded impossible. Yet pieces of her recent experiences suddenly began fitting together. The mysterious woman on the balcony, the strange feeling that had followed her through the palace. The instant recognition when she met Damien's eyes. Nathaniel slowly smiled. For decades, scholars debated whether the prophecy was symbolic. Tonight, I believe we have our answer. The ballroom erupted into astonished conversation. Several nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Others appeared genuinely moved. Many simply stared at Evelyn as though seeing her for the first time. Victoria felt her confidence slipping away entirely. A prophecy, she repeated quietly. That cannot be about her. Scarlet nodded quickly. There must be another interpretation. Yet even as they spoke, neither sounded convinced. Their father remained speechless. For years he had dismissed Evelyn as insignificant. Now every decision suddenly looked different beneath the ballroom lights. Damien studied Evelyn carefully. Did you know anything about this? He asked. Evelyn shook her head immediately. No, her answer was honest. I spent most of my life trying not to cause problems for anyone. A few guests lowered their eyes at that. Damien's expression softened. And yet somehow you became the solution to one. The words settled warmly inside her heart. Around them, conversations continued spreading throughout the room. But something else was happening too. The people who had ignored Evelyn earlier were beginning to approach. A noblewoman offered a respectful smile. Another guest greeted her politely. Even members of the royal staff looked at her differently. Not because she had changed, because they finally saw what had always been there. Kindness, grace, quiet strength. High above the ballroom windows, moonlight poured into the hall, illuminating the silver banners and crystal chandeliers. The same light touched Evelyn's hair and reflected softly in Damien's eyes. The moment felt strangely peaceful despite the excitement surrounding them. Then Evelyn noticed someone standing near the far doorway. Her heart skipped. It was the elderly woman from the balcony, the woman who had spoken about hidden stars and dark clouds. She stood smiling gently from across the room. When their eyes met, the woman offered a small nod, as if confirming something she had known all along. Before Evelyn could move toward her, the crowd shifted. Guests stepped between them. Moments later, the woman was gone. Evelyn searched the room, but could not find her anywhere. Is something wrong? Damien asked quietly. Evelyn looked back toward him. I think someone knew this would happen. Damien followed her gaze toward the empty doorway. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. Then perhaps destiny had more allies than we realized. Around them, the kingdom continued celebrating a prophecy fulfilled. Yet neither Damien nor Evelyn noticed the music returning to the ballroom. Neither noticed the renewed conversations. Because for the first time, both were beginning to imagine a future neither had expected to find. The celebration continued long into the evening, but for Evelyn it felt as though time had begun moving differently. The ballroom still shimmered beneath crystal light. Music filled the air once more. Guests laughed, danced, and shared excited conversations about the extraordinary events they had witnessed. Yet every path her eyes followed seemed to lead back to Damien. The realization was both comforting and overwhelming. For so many years she had stood on the edges of every room. Tonight she stood at the center of one. More surprising than the attention itself was the fact that she no longer felt alone beneath it. Damien remained nearby, speaking occasionally with advisors and nobles, yet his attention returned to her again and again. It was not possessive. It was not demanding. It felt natural, as though some invisible thread gently connected them no matter where they stood. Evelyn was still trying to understand it. Across the ballroom, Victoria and Scarlet watched in silence. The envy that had filled them earlier seemed smaller now, replaced by something closer to disbelief. Neither sister had expected destiny to choose the one person they had always overlooked. Their father stood beside them, unusually quiet. For perhaps the first time, he seemed forced to confront the difference between value and appearance. The daughter he had ignored had become the daughter the kingdom could not stop talking about. Lord Nathaniel approached Damien and bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, the council awaits your decision. Damien glanced toward the royal dais positioned at the front of the ballroom. The elevated platform overlooked the entire gathering. Every important announcement in the kingdom had been made from that place for generations. Slowly, understanding spread through the nearby guests. Conversations softened. Anticipation filled the air once again. Damien turned toward Evelyn. Will you walk with me? Her heart skipped. Where? A faint smile appeared in his eyes. To where you belong. Before she could answer, He offered his hand, not because she needed assistance, not because protocol demanded it, simply because he wanted her beside him. Evelyn hesitated only briefly before accepting. Together they crossed the ballroom floor. Hundreds of guests stepped aside. The crowd parted naturally around them. Whispers followed every step. Yet for the first time in her life, Evelyn did not lower her head. She did not try to disappear. She simply walked forward. When they reached the dais, Damien ascended the steps and then turned back toward her. The entire ballroom watched. Crystal chandeliers reflected moonlight across polished marble. Silver banners stirred gently in the evening air, drifting through the open windows. Everything seemed strangely quiet. Damien extended his hand once more. Evelyn joined him at the top of the platform. Gasps spread through the crowd. A servant, an overlooked Omega, a young woman who had entered the palace through the service corridors, now stood beside the Alpha King before the eyes of the entire kingdom. Damien looked out across the gathered nobles. His voice carried effortlessly through the hall. Tonight, many of you witnessed something rare. Silence answered him. You witnessed a truth that status could not control, wealth could not purchase, and power could not command. His gaze shifted toward Evelyn. Warmth filled his expression. For years I searched for something without realizing what I had lost. Tonight the moon revealed it. Evelyn felt emotion rise unexpectedly inside her chest. Damien continued. Some people spend their lives being overlooked. Not because they lack worth, but because others fail to see it. Several guests lowered their eyes. That ends tonight. Then, before the entire kingdom, Damien did something no one expected. The Alpha King lowered himself onto one knee. A collective gasp echoed throughout the ballroom. Evelyn stared at him in stunned disbelief. Damien looked up at her with calm certainty. Evelyn Hart, he said softly, though every person in the room heard the words. You spent years serving others without recognition. From this day forward, you will never stand alone again. Tears blurred her vision, not from sadness, from relief, from finally being seen. Around them, applause began slowly, then grew stronger. Nobles, advisors, servants, and guests rose to their feet. The sound filled the ballroom like a wave. Above them, moonlight poured through the palace windows. And for the first time in her life, Evelyn no longer felt like the forgotten daughter. She felt exactly what destiny had always known she was meant to become.